Hello and welcome to the first Talk Finance podcast of 2021. Delighted to be joined by Tony Rudd. Tony's someone I've known, I'm going to show some age here, for probably 15 plus years, Tony. You'll probably
it's
agree.
About that, I'd say. Yep.
Yeah. As an intro, Tony's the finance director, UK and Ireland for Dermalogica, which is the personal brand company that I think many people will know, part of the Unilever group. I'll just pass you over to you, Tony, just to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, so Tony Rudd. I've been at Dermalogica as the finance director for almost 3 years now. And then a good 12 years, I think, at Unilever, which that ties into the 15 years, John, since we've known each other. So my responsibility cuts across UK and Ireland. And as you say, Dermalogica is a well-known professional skincare brand. And it's a great role in terms of scope and responsibility for me. So very much enjoying it.
And we can see all the beautiful products in your screensaver, Tony. It's one of the best ones I've seen recently.
Yes. Yeah. I forgot to put a product behind me on my shelf so I could take one and make it look even more realistic.
Yeah. We've had a few client visits to see you on site, and every time I go, my daughter, who's nearly 18, she always says, "When you're going next?" Because I think we were lucky enough to get some free goodies last time. So she's not normally interested in what I do, Tony, I'll be honest with you. So a quick story to get started. So Tony, like I said, we go back a long way, and we actually placed you, Tony, didn't we? Back in 2006.
I think, yeah, sounds about
right.
Yep,
I think I've got my dates right, and that was really interesting. That was a graduate finance role, wasn't it? Because for yourself, I think you got into finance a little bit later. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So I didn't start out in finance. I don't know how many people can say that they did start out in finance, and how many people kind of sit there at college or university going, "I want to be into finance." It's sort of something that I think some people sort of find just sort of slightly into their career or come into it from different routes. But I started out in supply chain as my first role. I left school after A-levels and sort of, for want of a better description, fell into this role in supply chain and quickly sort of worked my way into the materials manager position there. And it was a great learning on many fronts. I had a really, really great manager there, actually, that supported me in what I'm doing. But ultimately, it meant I got into this position where I could make myself redundant from my role, but get paid a big chunk of money at the same time for doing so. And at that age, it's the sort of thing you take. So I did that, took the money, and I went to Australia for a year. And it was sort of supposed to be my thinking time of what I'm going to do next. I think probably 11 of the 12 months out there was less thinking and probably more traveling around and drinking all the other stuff.
I'm sure.
But my reason for taking a bit of the break in my career at that point was to figure out really what I wanted to go on and do. And I was at a point where it could have gone one or two ways. And one option for me was to run my own business. The other one was to go to university, which I'd always wanted to do, and study in something that I knew that would further my career and something that I enjoyed and was relatively passionate about, if you like, and that was a finance degree. So I had these two options. And the own business bit of mine that I was looking at doing was a business building ponds and maintaining ponds and sort of focusing on aquatics and that stuff. And that
outdoor like fish ponds, that sort of stuff.
Exactly, outdoor fish ponds, all that kind of stuff of all different sizes. And it was a business that originally my brother and I had set up when we were working at a relatively small company called World of Water at Turner's Hill, somewhere relatively near to you.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And I was working there part-time, weekends and holidays and that sort of stuff whilst I was at school. And these opportunities came up where customers would come in that would buy the stuff and they're like, "Do you know anyone that can build a pond?" And we used to give out cards of the local landscape gardener. And very quickly, my brother and I thought, well, we could do this. We've got enough skill to do this. So we started printing our own cards and putting them on the counter and giving out our own cards. So before we knew it, we were making more money building people ponds than what we were working in the shop at the weekends. And it sort of developed and grew.
Yeah.
And my brother took it a bit more seriously than I, and he ended up building a pond for Linford Christie.
No way.
Yeah. And some other big, and I built a pond and maintained a pond for an art dealer out in West Hoby that way somewhere. And it became quite serious. But then my brother moved up north of London somewhere to continue his sort of job. And he was very much into aquatics and he continued that way. I then fell into this supply chain role. And I still did this stuff, but it just sort of ticked along. But I always had this business idea at the back of my mind. And then whilst in Australia, it sort of come back up, and it's like, well, I could, at this point now, my brother had moved on significantly and was a partner in another chain, and therefore I could have leveraged to some degree his expertise and the chain to really develop this pond building business. So it really come down to, am I going to go into a business, on my own building ponds, or will I go to university into finance? And ultimately, I probably opted for the slightly easier option of going to do the university degree.
Yeah.
A bit less risky, I think. But also for me, there was always this thing that I wanted to do a degree. I wanted to come, but after A levels, I was never that certain on exactly what I wanted to go and do. So by this point now, I had a good focus. And
so it could have been Tony Rudd, entrepreneur.
Exactly, it could have quite easily been. But it is, and I think now it's where even in my finance roles, I've got a passion for the business side of things, and I sort of see my role as more of sort of less of the hardcore accountant reporting that side, but much more of the business and the commercial piece, which is where that kind of passion comes.
So when you went into Unilever, then that was like a sort of graduate role. So you pretty much worked your way up in various roles across finance.
Exactly. So so we mentioned that obviously you got me the role into Unilever at that point. When I come back from traveling Australia, did my degree, got my finance qualification, and then I was looking for roles, and there were 3 roles put in front of me. The one that you had for Unilever, I also had an internal audit role, and I had an accounting practice role. And Unilever was the one of the 3 that really, for me, carried the best opportunities. Knowing what I knew about Unilever and what you'd shared with me, the opportunity there was huge. Whether it was geographic, whether it was functional, whether it was all different parts of the business, it was a fantastic opportunity. So whilst in Unilever, it meant that I could do some very different roles, whether it was the operating company, whether it was the headquarters in London, whether it was global finance, project finance, all this kind of stuff, commercial finance. So many opportunities. So it was a great place to sort of build your career, moving into different places. And so
definitely.
Picked up many different pillars of that experience before I moved into Dermalogica.
Yeah, definitely. And so during that time, obviously, and a lot of this is relevant to a lot of people in their job search going in sort of a graduate level, you probably worked for many different people in different roles. Is there anyone sort of early on in your career that you sort of reflect on and think that was sort of an amazing person, manager, that maybe you took sort of traits from in your role now and how you work as a manager?
Yeah, I guess there's, I think back, I think one thing that I like actually is keeping quite an open mind on stuff. And I think, there's definitely managers that I think back and think, very inspirational, got a lot of fun. But I think I've learned stuff from all my managers away. It's good to have different managers that I see, because from the good experiences, bad experiences, the stuff where you learn from all these scenarios. And that's something that I think is really clear. Even if you're in a role and you feel like it's probably the hardest thing you've done, and you might not be doing everything that you think's right, you're actually learning a lot. And so I think when look back, I've learned stuff from all of the people that I've worked with. But when I think to there's been a couple of, I think, more key people in my career. I don't want to name too many people because I don't want to upset.
You don't upset people you leave out, do you? Either,
exactly.
So,
but it's I think I do think back to the people that have made really big difference. Actually, going back to the supply chain role that I had first, and the manager that I had there was. There's something about people that get you to think more about yourself and development and what's important, and the ones that bring that out in you are the ones that ultimately help you with your career more.
Yeah. No, I
really
totally
focus
agree.
in on what is it that you need to do.
Yeah. And do you think as well now, Tony, with COVID's bound to come up, and it won't be the last time I say COVID, but do you think being a manager in the current climate and staff welfare, obviously remote working, mental health, do you think it's probably the biggest challenge and test for managers at the moment? And
when I think about the COVID scenario, we've just been going through still, clearly we've got a long way to go yet as well, but what was important there was, in equal measures, is making sure the business is focused on the right thing, but also your team is extremely well supported, because it's been a tough time for every single person in terms of the changing of the working scenario, not having your colleagues around you, people that have come into new roles. How do you give people that support and that stability and that motivation and development in a very different scenario, with so much uncertainty out there? And keeping a team focused and aligned remotely, is incredibly tough, and actually it's very time consuming. Whereas in the office, when you're all sitting in a similar space, it's much easier to have those quick conversations and keep the mood up and keep people focused and just have those 5-minute check-ins. When you're doing things remotely through a video all day long, it's more difficult to make sure that everyone is on the same thing. So I think the COVID challenge has been as much around keeping the team motivated and engaged as it is making sure that you are focused on the right things, at work. For us, the journey through COVID is, everyone's been on to the digital bit is absolutely key, making sure people are leveraging that in all the spaces, whether it's the marketing or the selling, that bit's the technology and the utilization of that, all that stuff is really important. But nothing there is ever going to happen if you don't have the people behind it doing it. And so it is massively important to make sure that your team is the ones that.
Yeah, definitely. Did you have any sort of like particular pain points in terms of when COVID came along? Obviously, it affects all businesses. I'm sure the sector that Dermalogica are in, that would have affected those in terms of restrictions, that sort of thing. But was there anything like sort of technology focused, everyone working remotely? Any real sort of pain points you had?
I mean, I guess we weren't totally geared up for the working from home, if you like, but we weren't in a bad place there compared to, I guess, where some companies may not have been so far advanced. And particularly for me, I come from Unilever. Unilever is very agile. We'd already been on to the working from home stuff for a long, long time. So nothing there felt like a big shift. But for Dermalogica, not quite so far advanced. There's a lot of stuff we had to move around and get into place there. I think it's the mindset bit and the focusing on what really needs to happen. With the COVID bit, there were so many things that hit you at the same time. The prioritization of the bits that you really need to focus on were the tough bits, if you like, and making sure we're putting the time in, because time was tight. Really, there were so many things that you could do. It was easy to get distracted with the wrong things. It's how do you keep people focused on the right things and the things that were really going to matter.
No, I see.
Particularly for business Dermalogica, where we have half of our business is through our professional skin therapists, our PST as we call them. And the whole lot of their skin centers went into lockdown quite quickly. So you got all these customers that now can no longer sell through their traditional route. The retailers that we have, the John Lewis, Selfridges, Harvey Nichols, those guys, all into lockdown. So all of a sudden we had to find some very different ways of working quite quickly and give that reassurance that we're going to have the support there to the customers, so we keep this business moving.
In hindsight, anything, if dare I say this happened again, but would you do anything differently, or were you pretty happy how you dealt with it as a business?
I mean, I guess we're still not through it.
We're not.
I think it's like, depending on when the unlocking comes, which for some of our business and retail could not be until April, May at this rate at the moment.
It's not sounding great today, is it?
Yeah. And so I think it's very difficult to know at this point whether we've done all the right things or not. But one of the things for me that is ultimately extremely important is that customer support bit, because as much as we can pivot to digital and make sure we're leveraging that bit, what's going to help us really fast out the other side is making sure that we have really tried to keep our customers afloat in many scenarios. What is it that we can do financially or other to really help those businesses keep going? And it's tough because when you can't sell through your primary route, how do you keep that going? So the focus on that bit, I mean, it has been strong, and we've done a lot in Dermalogica to keep pushing that. So it's difficult to say what we might do different there because we haven't got to the end of it yet. I think personally, and for some of the team, balance is massively important. And we always, work-life balance, mental health, we know that's all important. Sometimes we're in the thick of doing stuff, you can forget it a little bit. And I think, but it is, so I think when I look back and towards the end of the year, working some incredibly long hours to keep stuff going, where probably still needs to work it, but actually there are points in time when you just need to switch off and take a break and refocus and do something else. And I think it's a danger that everyone slips into, but how do you keep that perspective and how do you keep focused on the right things? You need to have those switch off bits and you need to keep balanced. And that's probably one of the biggest learnings. How do I do that? How do I keep the team doing that to keep them really happy? Yeah.
And I think there's lots of positives that will come out of this as well. I think even like the whole sort of working from home, that's, for some businesses, it wasn't a thing. Do you know what I mean? It was, you maybe worked from home once a month because you've got someone coming around to do a delivery or something like that, and you'd reluctantly authorize someone to do that. But I don't know about you, but definitely recruitment sector, we've learned a lot from it in terms of how much more productive we can be working different hours and different from home. And then sort of if you've got any project work to do, you can get your head down and you're not in the office. So we won't go back to that normality of 5 days a week in the office. But is that something that you see a lot from your team in terms of how they're working from home and what the future might look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's in finance, you kind of there's these chunks of work that you've got to get focused on and got to do, and therefore working from home is really great to be able to do that stuff. It's sort of a double-edged sword in some ways, because being in the office, you're more visible. People can see finance is in danger of being one of these back office functions that doesn't get noticed so much. So there's this thing for me around visibility as well. And so being in the office is really important from the visibility bit. But also for me, it's like, great, I can get more done at home. But there's definitely, for me, we've recruited quite a few new people through lockdown. And although we've brought them in and we feel like we've done a pretty good job in terms of making them feel part of the culture and part of the business, I think there is a need for that working closely together in a physical space together. That if it goes on too long, you start eroding some of that team alignment and and motivation, where people just do feel like working in silos separately. And so I think it's massively important to have that balance of being in the office together to do some of that stuff. And that's where some of the creativity comes as well, I think. If everyone's working at home in their silos and they're not talking enough and having these interactive sessions, you'd lose some of that creativity. So I think
I totally agree. And I think sorry.
No, so there's clearly a balance there. It's good that we've all got some more space to do some stuff. There is a danger as well for me that the work-life balance that we keep coming back to and talking about, the boundaries between your working life and your home life have become far more blurred through COVID.
Yes.
And whereas before, what I miss in a way is a little bit of that transition time, where when you drive to work or commute to work, whatever it might be, you've got that bit of time to start thinking about, what am I going to do today when you're going in? When you're coming home, what is it I'm going to do when I get home? And you kind of lost that separation. And that actually helps your mind, I think, function better, because you've got this bit where you can switch on and you switch off. Whereas being at home, it can blur. And I think there's some stuff like that, working from home's great, but I think doing it all the time would be detrimental. You've got to get that balance.
Yeah. No, it's interesting you say that. And have you tried any of these? Because you see a lot of stuff online now about the whole sort of like the fake commute, or I don't know if I know you've got children, but I don't know if you've got like dogs, like the dog walk and going for runs to clear your head. And it's hard, isn't it? Because it's so restricted on what you can do. But certainly not the fake commute's not for me. But I suppose for me, I take the dog out at lunch. I might go for a run a few times a week, and that's probably like in my headspace. That's a bit like my commute time, when I start thinking about what I'm going to do with the week, or some sort of idea I'm trying to come up with. That's when I tend to do it. But what do you do for your sort of time at the moment then?
No, similar. I mean, running is always a big thing for me. So before lockdown, I was running 3 times a week or so. And actually at Dermalogica, we had a small, the value behind having this downtime was, in Dermalogica, we had a small running club. So I would go running with the general manager and some of the other the managers there. And we would take time out, and we'd sometimes have a running meeting where we spend an hour running, but then you have a meeting. But it's like that sort of thing, just to get out of the office, clear your head, do something else, whether it's commuting or doing that, it's massively important. Now, through the middle of COVID, I probably lost, I wasn't going 3 times a week. It might be down to once a week now. But that's the bit, like, for me, I lost the balance a little bit. But actually, that running time is that.
I find that,
you need to switch off your brain sometimes, just to kind of clear your head, and then the perspective comes back. And it's
definitely. Yeah, no, because for me, I wasn't a runner at all in lockdown. It was just something to do. And now I probably, obviously waiting for golf courses to open and stuff like that, and some normality. But I think I will continue to do it, especially on the days I work from home. I probably will run, because it's just it's a bit of like your own time, isn't it? And it does work. But I suppose back to your point when you said about team working from home, I totally get that. And I think one thing that people maybe don't realise about is retention. And I think if you're fully working from home, and when the difference about being in office, you do have a bit of that team camaraderie, and people sort of buy into the culture and the business. And I think if people maybe stick too much to remote working, I think retention may be more of a challenge for some companies.
Yeah, agreed. It is that, it is that whole environment where it really builds the culture when you're with the people, and you can have those small jokes in the office, and it is, that sort of stuff. But you can't really recreate that virtually.
Not at all.
Once a week we have a team session where, probably every other team session, we just let it be more freeform and just have a chat about stuff and have a bit of a laugh. But it's just not the same as overhearing one of your colleagues in the office say something, and everyone just can just have a laugh about it or something. It's just very different. And just the environment you're in, because everyone's sitting there at home, which is sort of, in a way, probably less creative. You would have an office space that's more geared up to get you thinking about more of the work and more of what the business you're doing, and just that creative space. You kind of miss that. So.
I agree, and I think for your business as well, obviously, because you've got the training facilities on site. I imagine when you're walking around, even when I've come to see you there, like you take a keen interest in what's going on, and I think that's also a big positive for you guys. You're not so sat in some sort of industrial estate in a small pokey office. You're you've got the office is amazing there, isn't it? It's great. And then you've got the training centres and the whole reception as you come in. There's quite a wow factor to it. So probably it's quite an enjoyable place to work.
Yeah, and it comes back to me a little bit to the, when I mentioned at the start about my business focus, my commercial focus. And when I think about, you want to be working where you can see what you make and what you do and how that's sold into the customers and how it matters, all that kind of stuff. And it's a risk in finance for me that people can get a bit too focused on numbers sometimes and not really relate it back to what it is you're selling or doing.
Yeah.
And therefore being in an environment where you can see this stuff, and like you say, in the Dermalogica, you can see our education centres, you get your products surrounding you all over the place. In Unilever, it was similar. The boardroom in Unilever used to be like a mock-up of one of the supermarkets, and you're surrounded by the products.
Yeah.
And it's being in that environment where you're really thinking about what does this company make, and what do we do, and how do we sell it, and what matters, and all that stuff. It just helps you think better about what I need to focus on at work.
No, definitely. No, totally agree. Tony, so to finish off, and I think you'll be a great person to ask this question from your background, people would have heard. So starting off, but not necessarily a graduate, but you're entering that career into finance. What, I suppose, looking back on your career today, what advice would you give to someone entering the sector, accountancy and finance? What sort of advice could you give them and what you've learned?
I mean, I guess for me, always keeping an open mind was something in terms of what's my next career move opportunity, if you like, and don't rule things out just because you start out your career and you think, I want to go down this route, and you can be a little bit tunnel focused, I think, sometimes in terms of where you go. And in the early days for me, actually, I was really quite hardcore focused on the accounting and the reporting part of finance. And I had the awareness of the other bits, but I was more focused. That was the bit I really wanted to go after. And I think actually keeping your options open for the different roles, the different parts of finance, the different functions is massively important. And linked to that, I think, is building a network, if you like. So when you join somewhere, building that network, whether it's people in finance, people in sales, people somewhere else, it doesn't matter actually, because you learn so much from these different perspectives of people with different amounts of experience. That's really what's going to help you as you start moving forward. You never quite know when you're going to need to reach out to someone to get a different bit of advice or whatever, but you can learn so much from these different people. And don't be afraid to have conversations with people really quite senior, because most of them are quite happy to have 15-minute chats around how does something work. And it's that sort of thing, I think. When I look back at what I was doing, I was probably a little bit didn't build that network as much as I could, and a little bit too focused. Actually, I could have done that bit better.
Yeah. Would you do the same again? Like if you went and did the career, obviously you had some great experience before going into finance, but would you do the same qualification? Would you go the same route? You could have been in accountancy practice if you took one of those jobs.
Yeah, I just don't. Yeah, I mean, for me, it wasn't commercial enough, so that wouldn't have worked. I think the commercial bit for me was something really, really important, and that blend of stuff that I've got through Unilever on that is, I mean, I wouldn't change that opportunity to pick up the experience I had for Unilever for sure. So yeah, but I'm still torn in my own mind to some degree whether I should have actually carried on building ponds actually. And
well, it sounds a great idea, very niche, but yeah, who knows?
But yeah, no, I'm pretty happy with how it's worked out through there, just because of the opportunities for Unilever have been fantastic.
Yeah. So. Or even going back, you could have stayed in supply chain and procurement.
Could have done. I mean, I've always, and still now in finance. I mean, I'm someone that works with quite a lot of logic and a methodical approach, and that supply chain bit just fits quite nicely with that.
Yeah.
Actually, one of my roles in Unilever was actually working in the supply chain function as opposed to finance. So I sort of had this role that sort of cut across both my reporting lines, but first supply chain. So I quite enjoy both of those bits. And
it probably looking back, it probably helped you out with the career, having that sort of life and work experience before you went into finance as a sort of the graduate type role. That experience probably all really did help.
It does, and I can see it when I recruit now. I sort of look for similar. Actually, I look for people that have had roles, whether it's part time or in between university and sort of summer play, whatever. It doesn't really matter. If they've had experience which gives them more real life experience, retail is great as well. When you're dealing with the general public in those sorts of scenarios, those sorts of experience are really, really valuable in terms of understanding what how can consumers think and what they do and what they buy and all those kind of things. That's really, really helpful.
Absolutely.
So I like it when people come to me when they've had some very different experiences, because you know that they're going to be thinking much wider than just kind of a narrow focus bit.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, great. Okay. Tony, it's been, as always great to talk to you. Appreciate your time. I think it'd be good for people, like I said, that maybe are looking at going into finance and listen to how you did it as well. Some interesting stories along the way, but really appreciate your time.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure. Enjoyable.